Good afternoon, and can I welcome members, invited guests and the public, both here and watching on the webcast, to today's meeting of the Housing Committee. The main item today is a discussion with invited guests on affordable housing delivery in London. Members of the public can follow the meeting on the webcast and on Twitter using #AssemblyHousing and #AffordableHousing. Please may I remind members, guests and audience to turn their phones off or put them on silent. Can I ask if any apologies have been received?
Chair, apologies for absence have been received from Assembly Member Curtin.
Thank you very much. Can I ask members to note the list of officers on the report and ask if there have been any additional interests to declare? No. Can we note the standing delegation of authority to the chair of the committee as set out in the agenda and as agreed at the London Assembly plenary meeting on the 6th of June 2019? Is that agreed?
Yes.
Sorry. Thank you. Can we agree the minutes from our previous meeting held on the 8th of May 2019?
Agreed.
Thank you. Can I ask members to note the completed and outstanding actions arising from previous meetings?
Noted.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the action taken under delegated authority?
Noted.
Thank you. And that brings us to today's main item, the affordable housing delivery update. Can I firstly ask members to agree the areas for consideration as set out in paragraph 4.6 of the report? Thank you. And can I welcome our guests, James Murray, who is the Deputy Mayor for Housing and Residential Development, and Ricardo Hyatt, who is the Assistant Director of Housing. So I'm going to kick off with a few general questions relating to the overall housing market. So firstly, James, London needs 66,000 new homes per year. How close are we to delivering this number of homes currently?
Thank you for inviting me along, Chair, to speak about housing delivery in London. And I think it's really important to set out from the beginning the context that we're in, which is why your question is a good place to start, because the 66,000 number that you reference is London's housing need. It's what London needs, and that's the number which has been arrived at through the process of analysing that need as part of developing the draft London plan. I think it's really crucial to emphasise that's what we need. It's not what we necessarily have the powers and the investment and the resources to deliver, and that actually forms the crux of our discussions and our lobbying asks and our priorities with government when we're talking about empowering London to truly fix our housing crisis. So at the moment, the level of delivery is roughly half what we need, but what the London plan, the draft London plan, does is set out where the capacity could be to build that 65,000 homes in terms of capacity, where those homes could in principle go. So the draft London plan does a very extensive process of identifying the sites, small sites and large sites, where 65,000 homes a year could go, but then crucially makes the argument that we need the investment, the powers and the resources to actually deliver them. And that really is where our discussion, our argument comes with government, because government, bluntly, at the moment, seems to think that you just give planning consents and things get built. But as independent analysis shows, that simply is not the case. London has quite a lot of planning permissions which have not been completed. They are homes which have been given consent. So planning, whilst not perfect, is not the blockage always in terms of getting homes built. What really is needed is investment in infrastructure, investment in social and other affordable housing, powers for councils and City Hall to build more ourselves, and crucially powers over land to make sure we can unlock those sites. So I think part of the discussion around the numbers has to start with being clear about what the need is and what the capacity is, but then must move on to the crucial debate around how do we actually get the powers and resources to build the homes that we need.
Before we continue, could I just ask if we can turn James up a bit, because it's a little bit quiet.
Okay.
Hopefully that'll be. Hopefully that'll be. Don't do that. Hopefully that'll be sorted out. So just following up on what you were saying about powers, and I know that in the last 10 years, more planning permissions have been granted in each year for the last 10 years every year that have exceeded the London Plan target, whatever that target was, and the target obviously has been going up over the last 10 years, but they've not been being built out. In terms of getting them built out, I assume part of it is capacity in terms of construction workers and things like that, but also a lot of it is land banking and developers tripping homes out. What powers would you like to see from the government to try and prevent developers from doing that, deter them from sitting on land?
Yeah, I think the discussion about land is really crucial to what we need to actually empower City Hall and councils to truly fix the housing crisis, because at the moment we have some powers over investment. We want a lot more, but we have some powers over investment. We have some powers over planning in terms of setting overall planning policy, but the area which we're really expanding in terms of what City Hall is doing at the moment is around interventions in the land market, about buying new sites, bringing them forward to build developments with really high levels of affordable housing. Now, all of what we're doing at the moment is in the context of market value, which, as you'll know, Chair, because you've spoken about it before in public, is calculated based on hope value. So it's usually a high market value for what that land is. If we could change the rules whereby the valuation of land was based on existing use value and give councils and City Hall much stronger and more effective powers to acquire that land where it's not being built and where homes should be being built on it, then we could really unlock a lot of sites and bring forward a lot more genuinely affordable housing. So I think powers over land is a bit that really must be front and centre of devolution asks, alongside the greater investment which we need.
And I presume those discussions are ongoing, even though I imagine it's possible we may have a new housing minister in a few months, given what is happening nationally. I mean,
these discussions have been ongoing since we got to City Hall, and with every housing minister, there've been a few. We've raised these issues and made sure that they know what we want. What we're hoping is that the new Prime Minister will listen to us about what we want to be devolved to London in terms of the investment, fiscal devolution, and the powers that we need. But clearly there's a bit of work that they have to resolve there in the national stage.
I know a lot about what the front runner to be the new Prime Minister thinks about fiscal devolution, because of course he was a huge advocate of it when he was Mayor of London. So let's hope you're pushing an open door in terms of fiscal devolution.
We could remind him of his record.
Should the bookies be correct in their predictions? But just coming back to the London housing market, what trends are we seeing in the wider London housing market, given the current economic and political uncertainty?
So one of the features which actually draws on a feature of London's housing market even before Brexit was on our horizons and on our daily agenda, which is around the reliance in London and the over-reliance on market-led housing, and in particular very expensive private homes for sale. So London had become very addicted to expensive luxury flats, and what that really meant is that the market was not only failing to meet Londoners' needs more broadly, but also was inherently unstable, because those kind of prices have a limited market. They're more susceptible, obviously, to economic impacts, economic uncertainty. And so I think with Brexit, increasing economic uncertainty and investment confidence overall, London has felt the brunt of that. And actually, if you look at the breakdown of what's happening across London, the part of the London housing market which has been most impacted is the private market in zones 1 and 2, so where a lot of the very expensive homes are located, whereas actually in zones 3 to 6, we've seen supply continue to be built there, because the prices, although still expensive, are relatively slightly more affordable than the private homes for sale in zones 1 and 2. So that's the kind of impact which you're seeing broadly across the piece. I mean, I think there isn't a person in the industry you talk to who doesn't say that Brexit is a number one concern. The uncertainty over Brexit is what's really dragging on their decisions at the moment. And obviously, from our point of view, that has a big impact on our affordable housing programme as well, because housing associations are very reliant these days on cross-subsidy from private sale to subsidise their affordable homes. That's really been the effect of government reducing the amount of grant, the amount of subsidy that they put into each individual home, has meant that housing associations had to rely far more on the cross-subsidy from private market housing for sale. So the issues which the private market face impact reasonably directly on our affordable housing programme because of that cross-subsidy element.
Do you have any indication of what's happening, for example, in terms of demand with the buy-to-let market, whether or not that's still buoyant, or whether or not there is more landlords are buy-to-let landlords are exiting the market? Do you have any sense of what's going on there?
I don't have any specific data on that. I might see if Ricardo has any to hand. No, but we can certainly check with the data team at GLA to see if there is any live data on that we can share with the committee.
I just think it might be quite interesting. And what assessment have you made of any impact on wider delivery arising from your 35% affordable benchmark, and what evidence do you have of that?
Well, I mean, the evidence, I think, is really clear that the approach to affordable housing, about which, we make absolutely no apologies, is working. It has been our priority from day one. We were very clear about it. We developed a policy about having a threshold, a higher level of affordable housing. We developed it with councils. We talked to the industry about it so they knew it was coming. And actually, when it was introduced, people in the industry were actually overall fairly welcoming of it. People said that the threshold might be too high in some cases, and other people from councils might have said it should be higher still. But I think the point from the industry's perspective was that it was certainty for them, and it showed them that this was what was expected from them now, and they would have to do it. So actually a lot of home builders said this is good for us, because now we don't have to guess, and we don't have to compete on the basis of not knowing how much affordable housing we're going to deliver. We now know it has to be 35% or 50% or whatever the relevant threshold is. I think if you look at the affordable housing coming through in planning permissions, there was some recent analysis by Grant Thornton published last month. That really shows the impact. I think I have the figures here, which I can share with you afterwards. But if you look at the planning permissions given in 2018, the number of affordable homes was 36% of the total. And bearing in mind when we came into office and we looked at what we'd inherited, the level of affordable housing in planning permissions had fallen to just 13% under the previous mayor, and that shows the kind of scale of change that we've been able to achieve. Just to
interrupt, so is that 36% across all applications that have been granted, or is it on referable applications?
No, the Grant Thornton analysis is on planning permissions in London generally, so we can send you the link for that.
Yes, we'd appreciate that. And thank you. I believe you also wrote to us as well with some data on the time applications are taking going through the viability process versus the fast track.
Yes, that's process. Right. I think I wrote to the previous chair of the committee, which I hope she shared. Have you seen that letter?
Yes, yes. So we've got that on the record.
Yeah, so it's quite useful comparison, sort of showing if you compare applications which go down the fast track route, so the ones that hit 35% and then go through the planning process without having to have the viability and the reviews and so on. To compare that with the ones that go down the viability tested route, the ones the fast track do what they say on the tin. They are actually faster. And actually, if I remember rightly from the data that we looked at, if you look at all of the fast track route compared to the viability tested, they're faster. If you take out two outliers in the fast track, two kind of ones which were oddly long for other reasons, not connected to affordable housing, it drops even more dramatically. So I think there's some quite clear evidence there that you're getting more affordable housing more quickly, so it is a win-win.
Thank you. And just on the Grant Thornton analysis, is the data available by borough so we can see, or in or out of London, so we can see any patterns across different parts of London?
I'll check the Grant Thornton data. We'll ask our team to check that and send it over to you.
Thank you very much. Do you have any evidence of the impact of the benchmark on land prices, for example?
Yeah, so land prices are notoriously untransparent. That's one of the criticisms we have of the current system. Yes. So we do rely more on sort of industry analysis and anecdote rather than there being a sort of database that you can check to see what's going on. But there was a very interesting report by Savills, actually, when they looked at the impact on land prices. And they concluded quite clearly that the 35% was impacting on land values and had been priced in to calculations. So as I say, that was reassuring that you had, Savills independent. They don't have a particular agenda to support or attack us either way. They just can look at what's going on. They said the 35% was being priced into land values. I mean, it is based, I think, more on, case studies and anecdote rather than a comprehensive database, simply because that database doesn't exist. But certainly the anecdotes which I would hear and the comments that I hear would endorse that approach.
And finally, for me, just on permitted development, which is something that's at the top of my mind at the moment.
And great report you did, by the way.
Thank you very much. Have we passed peak development, do you think, in terms of the volume of additional homes that it's been producing?
I hope so. I mean, it's been a disaster for London. We've not only seen office tenants in some cases evicted from offices to make way for substandard housing, but we've seen developments with flats which are too small without the right amenities and crucially, no affordable housing being built. And you can see this, across places in London. It started, I remember, when I was a councillor in Islington before my current role, but you can see it continue to this day. I hope in a way that we have passed the peak for two reasons. Firstly, some boroughs have now had time to bring in Article 4 directions, which limit what can go on there. I think I'm right in saying Croydon have an Article 4 direction which came in last year, so that would be one where we are now at a stage where they've had enough time to implement the Article 4, so that would then limit ongoingly what can happen in terms of permitted development. I suspect also, and this contributes towards how bad the policy is, there was a glut of kind of low-hanging fruit, if you like, the kind of ones which just got converted very quickly and people just wanted to rush through. So I suspect there was a kind of glut there which happened up front, and then the sort of better quality office space is hopefully what's left now. But I'd imagine some of the poorer quality office space would have been converted to poor quality housing right at the beginning, which is a really awful legacy for us all to have now.
Well, my concern is I think the government are ploughing ahead with extending permitted development rights so that buildings can actually be knocked down and replaced with something of the same scale and footprint. They would also have permitted development rights. Is that your understanding that they're ploughing ahead? And have you had any success in persuading them that certainly in London this shouldn't happen?
Yeah, so I suppose in a way it's not exactly the same, but there's kind of an iteration of the vacant building credit, which is floating around a bit of time ago. And in our supplementary planning guidance around affordable housing, we essentially said that vacant building credit did not apply in London. So we'll continue to oppose permitted development if it's extended in the way you suggest. Thank you.
I've seen Assemblymember Berry and then Assemblymember Gavron.
Just a very quick question about data. Obviously, we're scrutinising the affordable housing GLA housing starts on site that you release shortly after the end of the financial year. And obviously, there you're coming in at the just over the. We'll talk about that in the next question. Just over the target level. The London Development Database spreadsheet that comes out shortly after, around about the same time, it's very hard to use that to drill down and compare more about the data that you're putting out from your own funded schemes. You appear to know they've started before the London Development Database knows it started. So if I look for overall affordable homes that have started during that financial year, the London Development Database does not show me even 14,000, and that's just your funded ones that you're talking about there. Is there anything that can be done to speed up and make more consistent those two things? Because it is hard to scrutinise and drill down more into your data if it's not available at the same time as what's in the more detailed information we can get out of the London Development Database. Yes. That tells us like where things are.
I think I understand the point you're making, and they are drawn from some entirely different sources, which is the reason why they don't obviously link up. And the London Development Database is one where I know that the planning team, the working digital team here, are very keen to make that more dynamic, to make it easier to more useful rather than it having to wait for returns to come in from councils and so on. I don't think I have a quick answer for you. I'd be very happy to meet with you. It might be worth having someone from housing and planning in the room together so that we could discuss it in a bit more detail to see how the two link up. I think that, I don't want to overpromise what links might be possible to make between them because, as I say, the the way that the data comes in is very different.
Can I clarify that? So I think I understand it. So you're funding schemes and you're in touch with, say, project managers, and you're saying, are they started yet? Are they started yet? And eventually they say, yes, they've been started. And then at the point at which they tell you that, they also tell the council planning team that they've started it, even if it's a council developing the scheme. There's a separate team in planning who then log it into their database, and then they supply you with that data to say what's going on with the planning applications in their borough. So there's a lag for that, isn't there? Do you know how long the lag is? Because at the moment, for example, for the previous financial year up to last March, there's a whole load of schemes that appear to have been started on the 31st of March 2018. Like 200 of them, something like that. But for this year, there's only about 4 that are currently logged as starting during that period of the end of March.
So on which database are you talking about now?
This is the LDD.
LDD, okay.
Yeah, so I'm thinking there's a whole load of things that are coming in for the end of the year that people wait and tell you about, and when we might expect to see those come through.
Yeah, so I might ask Ricardo to come in a bit about this, because I think one of the issues that you identify with the London Development Database is that it relies on councils collecting information locally and then sending it to us, which is why I was referring to the importance of seeing if we can make it more dynamic, so we didn't have that delay built in. At the same time, the logging of starts under the Affordable Homes Programme, we know that people typically log more towards the end of the year, so it might have started on site, and then the person takes a little bit of time to actually physically log it on the system. So there is a built-in delay there. They're different delays, which I guess confuses the picture a little bit, but I suppose both of them are subject to those slightly different delays. So I don't know, Ricardo, if you want to add anything there.
Yeah. The only thing I would add to that is clearly for those homes that are funded through our programme, we do have a direct relationship with all of those delivery partners. Whereas if it isn't the borough who are directly delivering the homes, clearly they have the planners within the boroughs who collect that information that then comes in for the London Development Database. They then have to go through a third party, so that process takes longer, which probably explains the the lag to an extent. But also clearly there isn't necessarily an incentive for those partners to provide that information, as there is for us, because there are funding and grant they can draw against those milestones. So it's in their best interest to log them on our systems as soon as they happen.
Yeah. Did you have an idea about the length of delay? Is it? I mean, it's been 2 months so far. Will it be another 2-3 months before we can? It's
difficult to say without, as James promised. I think we'd be happy to sit down with you and discuss it further.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. I will actually. I've got some questions on stats as well, but I'll bring them in after the next question. But Assembly Member Gavron, quickly, you had a question.
Just going to return just to PD rights, and it's 18 months now, I think, but no, nearly coming up to 2 years since the PD rights were extended to light industrial, which is mainly all those premises on non-designated industrial land behind high streets and so on, the makers, the mechanics and so on, which are really important. And I just wondered if we could have the figures for what's, now nearly 2 years on, we might have some meaningful figures about what's happening in relation to those being converted into homes. And just to say, alluding to what Tom Copley was saying about the latest, now I think it's not even a consultation anymore, it's decided, isn't it, that the government is going to allow for all the permitted development rights buildings, so to speak, to be the B1s and so on, to be able to be demolished. And I think you can go 2 stories up. And I just want to say here and reinforce that the Assembly, anticipating this, asked that we should ensure that when there is any redevelopment, if that goes through, if there is redevelopment, that the actual affordable or the workspace should be at a very minimum replaced, so that if there's redevelopment, so it doesn't all go to housing, so that we actually keep, I know it's slightly off-piece this, because we're looking at, but we're very keen on affordable workspace as well as affordable housing. And just want to sort of say that we were very keen to see that included in the final version of the London Plan.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question is from the Deputy Chair, Assembly Member Boff.
With regard to your target for the 116,000 affordable homes, you exceeded the target by only 544 homes, which is at the lower end of the target. Why is delivery still only just above the bottom of the target range?
I think, as is very well known, both within year and within programmes, starts the delivery of affordable housing investment programmes is always typically backloaded. So that will happen both within the year, as you can see in terms of the quarterly logging of starts, and over the course of the programme, they'll tend to be backloaded as well. This is partly because clearly councils or housing associations who are accessing the money have to identify the sites, gear up, get on site and so on. And this is one of the issues which we have raised with the government and continue to raise about the nature of the funding settlements which we get, being as they are in sort of lumps, you know, in defined programs where they operate over a few years, and they tend to encourage people who build affordable housing to deliver in this way, where it ramps up and then it falls down again at the beginning of the new program, ramps up and so on. And that doesn't seem to be ideal from anyone's point of view. So our argument would be twofold. Firstly, you know, if we are going to continue to negotiate settlements with government, at the very least give us a longer, say a 10-year settlement, whereby we can smooth that money over the time period more sensibly, begin discussions about the next programme in good time so that we can smooth out at the end and so on. But also to the wider argument about devolution to London. If we were able to raise our own taxes and spend them within London, then we could have a more predictable income stream, and we wouldn't be subject to this periodic funding negotiations, which does cause the very pattern which you're identifying.
So are you happy with the number of starts you've declared recently?
Yes, yeah, we believe we're within the ranges we've identified. We feel we're on course for 116,000.
What does the government need to do in order for you to meet that 116,000?
Sort out Brexit. Wouldn't be a bad place to start. The impact of Brexit can't be underestimated. The uncertainty is already hitting, as I said earlier, housing associations as well as people who are focused mostly on private homes for sale because of the cross-subsidy element. And so, you know, we have housing associations speaking to us about the issues which they're facing with their boards and so on, facing the uncertainty, delaying projects, you know, maybe being a bit more cautious about what they're doing, and all of that adds up, and all of that has an effect potentially on what happens. Now, at the moment, with the current uncertainty, we've identified a fund of an extra £200 million, which we announced earlier this year, which is there to help housing associations if they can go further over the rest of this calendar year through the period of uncertainty. So if we can give them some extra funding which helps them particularly switch, let's say, market sale homes into affordable homes, that helps to de-risk their programme because then they haven't got as much market housing exposure. That's what we are able to do over the course of this year to help combat the current uncertainty. Now, if we get to a situation where there is no deal, Brexit, that escalates dramatically. You know, things then become very, very urgent, and government will have to step in and help us. And that's indeed what we wrote to the Secretary of State about jointly with the G15 and the Housing Executive Member of London Councils recently, setting out the kind of support we would need in the event of a no-deal Brexit. And I think it's, you know, really deeply concerning as the prospect of that becomes more likely.
In order to deliver the number of homes you're committed to by 2022, the affordable starts need to accelerate at a much quicker rate than we've seen so far. You need to be delivering around 24,000 homes annually for the next 3 years. How are you ensuring that those minimum targets are exceeded?
Well, we ensure that the minimum targets are exceeded by building the programme generally, and then throughout the year building it up further. So we have a number of agreements with councils, housing associations, including strategic partners and other affordable home builders to build housing over the course of the year. And what I do working with Ricardo and the rest of the team is to very closely monitor how projects are coming along. If some projects look like they might be falling away, we then talk to the home builder, the housing association, of the council to work out is there some kind of extra support they might need to keep that on track. But we can actively manage the programme to make sure that these homes are coming forward. And at the same time, because although this programme is defined within a few years, going out to 2022 as it does means that certainly now, and indeed in the couple of years preceding the current year, we had time to have discussions with housing associations and councils about slightly more medium-term projects. So we could say to them a year or two ago, well, if we buy this land, could you then bring it forward and build it out? So a good example being, potentially, depending on how it goes, the example of Peabody buying the Holloway prison site, where we did a loan for them to acquire that site, and then sorry, you're looking at me.
No, carry on.
No,
Yes,
sorry, the Holloway prison site, where we gave Peabody a loan there, which enabled them to buy that site, and then some of the affordable units on that scheme, when it starts to be delivered, can then count towards 116,000 if they're within the time period which we expect them to be. So, the relationship with housing associations, particularly the bigger housing associations, which we call strategic partners, is sort of iterative. It's a constant back and forth, working out if they've got concerns, how we can help them, how we can build their program higher, how we can convert market units into affordable homes, and so on. So it's an ongoing process which takes up a lot of the team's time, but they're very focused on doing that.
When will you have the finalised annual targets for 2021, 2020, 21 and 21-22?
That's subject to discussion with government.
Okay. Do you know when those discussions will take place?
We don't know who the Prime Minister is going to be in a few weeks' time. So
you haven't anything in the
we have to wait and see how the discussions go.
I don't even know who the housing minister will be.
Wouldn't it be
Prime Minister will be
more transparent to just have a single target rather than a range, especially now so much of the programme funding is already allocated?
I think that the reason why we went for for ranges rather than specific targets was to recognise the fact that we have these strategic partnerships with big housing associations. So if you look within the 116,000, about 45,000 odd of those units are with strategic partners. So they're the big housing associations who we have more flexible arrangements with. And what that means is that we've done a deal with them in 2016-17 to deliver a certain number of affordable homes by 2021 and subsequently 2022 for a certain amount of money. But up front, they didn't have to commit to exactly what years they would all fall in. They had a bit of flexibility and they could build their programme over the kind of 5 or 6 years. They had a bit of flexibility to do that. So that's actually worked quite well, because I think what it's enabled housing associations to do is to be a bit more flexible in terms of when they get the money from us, they can buy new sites, and they can use the money for land purchases, for instance, and then get those homes delivered. But I think the reason why the ranges have been so important is because of this flexibility around strategic partnerships.
Can you just clarify whether or not the 116,000 target includes the 7,189 started in 2015-16?
Yes.
When the original 3.15 billion was funding for 90,000 homes was announced, the previous mayor made clear that the funding period was for 2016 to 2021. How now can it include the previous year's homes?
So my understanding is that the ones started from 15-16 were within the 2015 to 18 national programme, which then has been subsequently superseded by more recent programmes, but the money has been effectively rolled up together. So when we were discussing with the government around what the relevant time periods were, they effectively rolled the funding settlement, which rolled over from the previous mayor. The small amount of money left was rolled up into the 3.15 billion, and then it had subsequently the 1.67 billion added to that. So it's all been rolled up into one single target over a single time period, and that's been clear with the government from the start.
I mean, I got the press release in front of me from 2016. It kind of implies that the 3.15 billion was for 2016-2021.
Well, the 90,000 target has always applied to 15 to 21.
But they're not applying to that 3.15 billion. The 90,000 was that 3.15 billion, is that correct?
So the 3.15 billion includes some of the money which would have been allocated before and the money rolled up with the money that we got from government in that discussion.
Right. So you'll make reference to the previous mayor's contribution to that target.
As I say, it's a program we inherited because by its very nature, when we come in halfway through a program, we inherit the tail end of it, but we then superseded it with a much bigger settlement and a much more ambitious target.
When do you anticipate that there will be a big rise in completions? They're up this year, but they're still at the lowest, fairly low level. Do you see that record being improved on very soon?
You'd expect completions to be on an upward trend. I mean, I think that the exact timing of it is hard to predict because it depends on exactly the complexities of the building projects in question and how long it takes on the ground. But I think the lag between starts and completions is a well understood aspect of housing delivery.
Yeah. So are you expecting, therefore, to the rate of completions to change over the next 2 to 3 years?
I'd expect them to go up over the next 2 to 3 years. I mean, to be honest, we'd have to look at it in more detail to analyse exactly by how much, but we would expect them to start rising.
Next year? This year?
As I say, we'll have to look in more detail exactly what we expect to happen, but you would expect the starts to ultimately lead to those completions.
I just thought, on that, do you know what the average time is between a start and a completion, usually?
It very much depends on the size of the scheme, but on average it could be up to 3 years from the first brick being laid to final completion, on average.
Thank you.
Obviously it depends on the size of the scheme.
Okay, sorry.
You're not focusing on completions, but you can't live in a start. You can live in a completion. And do you recognise that those numbers are what matters? How many have been finished?
So what matters is building a lot more affordable housing, and we had to agree something with government, a target against which we could be held to account, on the basis on which we could get the funding agreement from government. Now, one of the arguments in favour of starts rather than completions is clearly it's easier to hold someone to account for starts because completions have a 3-year lag, and if you have a 4-year mayoral term, it's harder to identify what the accountability route is there. So that's one reason why starts are a more appropriate measure politically to have as the basis of any agreement. I also think there is an important point around rushing to complete. Anecdotally, when you have a completions target, people might have pressure on them to rush to complete homes, and the last thing you want in new build homes is for the quality to be put at risk toward the end of the development programme because people are rushing to complete it, whereas having the focus on starts doesn't have that same inbuilt, perhaps perverse incentive.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you. As I mentioned before, I've just got a few questions on the statistics. MHCLG don't have data for 2018-19 yet, but if we look at the previous year, it says there are a total of 14,202 affordable starts in London. Now, the GLA funded 12,555 of those. So is that to say then that only 1,647 affordable homes are started through non-GLA funded routes like Section 106 and housing association zone funds and council borrowing?
I mean, that's basically what it implies. I mean, I'll put the health warning on it that there is quite a few questions around the MHCLG stats and their accuracy. We can vouch for the GLA ones because we can see the data and we have
Yes.
confidence in that data. I think I'm not just blaming a third party, but I think that quite a lot of councils as well, sometimes don't have total confidence in the MHCLG stats. But broadly speaking, I think what you're saying is correct.
Yeah.
It's interesting though, because in some cases there are certain boroughs where there have apparently been no affordable homes started that are not GLA funded for the 3 years 2015-16 to 2017-18. Now looking at some of these boroughs, so for example Greenwich is one of them. Now I saw on my Instagram today that Danny Thorpe, the leader of Greenwich, is cutting the ribbon on some brand new council housing that they've built themselves.
Yeah.
So it cannot be the case that Greenwich has 0 affordable starts that are not in the last 3 years. That are not GLA funded.
Yeah, as I say, councils do have questions about the MHCLG stats, and
Yes.
you highlighted a good example.
But is that the best that we've got? I mean, the GLA obviously you count the GLA ones,
Yeah.
but beyond that, I think it is important that we know what other affordable contributions are being made towards reaching the target.
Yeah, I think it's a good point to raise with government around the validity of those MHCLG stats. I mean, going back into the 90s, 80s and stuff, the only data we have are those MHCLG stats. But for more recent years, the GLA ones are, as I say, we have a lot more confidence in them because we can actually see what they are and we're confident about them. I mean, I'm going to see, Ricardo, do you want to come in? Because I know Ricardo obviously has a longer history in the...
Yeah, so, as James says, we can only vouch for the stats
Yes.
relating to the programs that we fund. And in terms of, I can't speak for MHCLG's approach to recording stats, but I do know, for example, that in years gone by, numbers have been rounded to the closest 10, and the approaches have been taken, so it's difficult to get back to the exact figures.
Okay. Would members be content if I wrote to Nikki, Sean, would members be content if I wrote to MHCLG about the statistics and questioned that? Because I think it is really important that we get an accurate picture. Is that okay?
That would be very helpful.
No, it's similar to the question I had about the planning data.
Yes.
It doesn't seem to correspond very well.
Yes. Yes. Well, in that case, I will do that.
My question
Nikki.
was really, sorry, sidetracking, I'm sorry about that, interrupting, was really about the relationship between the development database and stats and MCLG. I mean, can one of you help us?
I mean, again, they'll be sourced in different ways. So I think we're identifying sometimes some of the frustration with the different data sets in that the MHCLG stats will be sourced in a different way than the London Development Database. I mean, I think, as I say, within the limits of what it covers, that's why we think the affordable home starts are the most reliable. The limit being it's only ones which are within our funding programme, but with that caveat, we are pretty firm on them. With the London Development Database, obviously it's reliable, but it does rely on boroughs to collect the data and then to come up in centrally into the London Development Database. MHCLG, I'm glad you're writing to them.
Okay. Thank you. I think it's your question next anyway, Member Barry, but if you want to
Can I just
go
add
straight into it.
that, the other bit of MHCLG data is the housing stock data, which if you look at the change in, for example, social housing over time, the pattern's roughly the same, but it's really hard to get the numbers to correspond with what we know is happening in London, if that makes sense. So it's very hard to get the picture to be clear.
Yeah. Okay, do you want to go into your question on tenure?
I will ask about tenure now. So what we have in the data so far that comes out of your affordable housing starts release at the end of the financial year is that 3/4 of the starts in the year have been the various kinds of intermediate homes, including what I think is old-style affordable rent homes, which the Mayor doesn't consider to be genuinely affordable. Can you, first of all, outline the different kinds of intermediate homes that there might be? Because there's two columns in your release, one of which is other affordable rent, which I'm assuming is the old style affordable rent, and then the other one is other intermediates. And the amount of those in the data has gone up quite a lot since the previous year. So that must be something new that you know about, that you can tell us what that is. And can you explain why so much, i.e. 3/4 of the affordable starts, are still in this intermediate range when clearly the need is for a majority of social rented homes?
Sure. So I'll speak a bit about it, but I might ask Ricardo to come in as well if I've missed any important detail to add, which is that I start by saying the funding agreement that we got from government lent very heavily towards intermediate housing, and that is something which, you know, we felt certainly to start with was very much not the right balance. You know, bearing in mind when we came into office and we had discussions with government in 2016, all of the money available was for intermediate housing. There wasn't a penny available, never mind social rented, just for rented housing, for affordable rented housing, full stop. Right? So all of the money available was for some form of home ownership, through shared ownership, starter homes or whatever, all of it. So that's kind of our starting point. In terms of our discussions with them, we lobbied them, pushed them and so on. We managed to get some money to be used for affordable rent, which we then used in this innovative way using the London affordable rent caps, which are social rent caps. So we've used affordable rent money for homes at social rent levels. And then more recently, when we got money off government in March 2018, we did get some money for social rent, which is effectively the first time that a national government has given money for social rent in about 10 years, which we managed to get out of it. So that was really good. But it still started from a point of view where 100% was for shared ownership and starter homes and other low-cost home ownership. So the programme has always been very weighted toward home ownership and intermediate forms of homes, which, from our point of view, they play a role, but we clearly needed a much bigger role for social rent. And that's what we would want to see, and that's what we'll be going into government and saying as part of our negotiations with them around the next funding settlement, that social rent needs to play a far bigger role, needs to be the majority of funding, needs to be for social rent, and that's what we need to see. Now, within the starts that we have at the moment, as I say, what's really important for us is that we have been able to effectively bring back social rent after it, was effectively extinct under the tail end of the previous mayor's programme and hit nearly 4,000 homes at social rent levels. And the other affordable rent, they are not technically intermediate homes. They would be considered general needs housing, but they will be at rent levels which are not London affordable rent caps. Now, they would still be, if they are new contracts signed under this administration, they would still be affordable because the level at which they're set would be checked to make sure they're affordable. But they wouldn't be intermediate homes. They would still be sort of general needs housing.
When you say general needs, you mean sort of council, ones that can be allocated by councils? As council
through housing registers. Yeah.
But at higher than London affordable rent? Higher
than London affordable rent. But if their contracts were signed by us, they would be lower than the 80% of market rent in areas where that would be unaffordable. So they would be kept more affordable than that.
Are you able to provide us with more details about that? Because how are you defining that? Against market rates or against local housing allowance, for example, or wages?
It'll depend very much on the specifics of what an individual housing association or council has as their planning consents or in the programmes which are already up and running. But we can go away and check that and see what data.
So this sounds like you're tailoring what are being defined in your statistics as affordable housing. You're tailoring that in quite a bespoke way to what housing associations, but not councils, from what you just said, want to charge as rent.
And saying
that's affordable.
No, so if people want to access our grant at the normal grant rates, then they will need to it'll need to be London affordable rent or social rent. But there is some flexibility in the programme for other affordable rent, particularly if they're schemes which were started a while ago. If they're still genuinely affordable, but at rates slightly higher, they might still be funded through the programme.
But at intermediate grant levels, not at the rate you're giving out for properly socially.
It wouldn't be at intermediate grant levels. It would be at whatever the relevant grant level was for that project.
I don't understand. So in your,
Could I just,
yeah.
because my understanding was that under this mayoralty there would be no funding for homes under the old affordable rent scheme. It would just be London affordable rent or intermediate. But are you saying that you seem to be saying you have been signing contracts for homes that are old style affordable rent?
Yeah, some sort of discount
Which I'm just
to
slightly
market
confused by.
rent that's
So-
up to 80%. I mean, that is the old definition.
Yeah.
That's still the same thing.
So if I could clarify, quite a lot of these numbers will be from legacy schemes that are multi-phased, where contract will have already been signed, long-term projects where starts happen over a certain period of time.
That's sort of what I assumed. They were a
Yeah.
hangover from a previous funding scheme,
Yeah.
but then
So,
I thought I heard there were contracts signed as well.
however, where through negotiation and through the planning process, a strategic partner, for example, secures the planning consent for a scheme with a mixture of affordable rent, London affordable rent, and social rent, for example. Because we do have that funding agreement with them in place, if they've managed to secure a planning consent, as in has been deemed by the local authority that these range of rents being charged on a particular scheme is appropriate for their local area and meets local demand, then
We all know that planning policy is lagging behind our funding policies. So why would we use the fact that the council's given planning consent for something that might be at a higher rate as an excuse to give a grant for something that doesn't conform to our definition of affordable? That doesn't make
But it's
sense.
important to note that, in funding those different tenures, they do not attract the same levels of investment. But at the same time, those homes, whilst they don't meet the definition of what this mayoralty determines as genuinely affordable, if they are meeting local need, there is still a gap or level of subsidy that is required to deliver those homes, which in the definition, through the national planning framework, those are defined as affordable homes.
So we're giving them some kind of grant, roughly, but
Potentially.
not the same level as we'd give
No.
to a socially rented home.
No.
So it's all quite bespoke. So can we ask for some data, please, that breaks down other affordable rent for us in maybe the last 2 years? Because what I'm seeing from the performance table that I've got here is, for example, these other affordable rent homes were 2,500, over that 2,700 in 2015-16 and 16-17. I'm assuming that's legacy agreements. But then 2017-18, it was still 1,975. 2018-19, it was still 1,212. So presumably we're still entering into new agreements on these
Not necessarily.
on these schemes.
Not necessarily.
And planning permission only lasts 2 or 3 years. So we're not talking about old planning permissions either. We're talking about new ones.
But there could be a mixture of all of those things.
Yeah.
Could be old planning consents, could be multi-phased estate region schemes, that are built out over 5 or 10 years. It could be, affordable housing programs or schemes that have been funding through the housing zones, for example, which, as we know, is a 10-year program.
So these are quite, can we ask for a breakdown of 2017-18 and 2018-19 for other affordable rent? Some kind of breakdown that shows us the levels of rent that are being given grants and the levels of grant that are being given. Would that sound reasonable? If we can
that
maybe
sounds
write
very
with a more
reasonable.
precise request for a breakdown.
Sounds very reasonable.
Because it does seem to me like quite a lot of not genuinely affordable rented homes up to the old definition still getting funded.
Assembly Boff wants to, is that all right?
Can I
You
just ask on the
quick-
same tag, perhaps ask in a different way? As far as you're concerned, is an affordable rent property affordable? Under your definition, under the Mayor's definition of affordable, is an affordable rent property affordable?
So we set out really clearly that the Mayor doesn't believe that 80% of market rent is genuinely affordable in most parts of London. And that's why we set these caps for London affordable rent, which are based on social rent levels. And so it might be technically an affordable rent, something delivered within the affordable rent funding, the affordable rent scheme, but the caps will be based on social rent levels. So actually, whether it is defined as affordable rent or social rent, what's important is what the rent level is capped at.
Sure, but the 80% was always a maximum. I don't know many places where it's applied. So you are saying that you can count an affordable rent property as affordable. under the affordable rent rules, that can be
An
defined
an affordable rent property, because it depends what the rent is,
All right.
rather than it being, because London affordable rent is technically affordable rent, because it's funded with government money which is allocated for affordable rent.
So affordable
which
rent
is the level
can
of-
be affordable.
It's just, it depends what the rent is.
Yeah, but you've established an affordable rent property can be affordable.
It depends
Yeah,
what the rent
I know
is.
this, to anybody who's just tuned into this, that must sound like complete
Thanks for
gobbledygook.
clarifying that, Assembly Member.
Thank you very much.
Is this on the, Nikki and Tony, is it on this very point?
Yeah.
Because we are
It's
intervening on Sian.
Mine is on the multi-phase, because I thought we had a system whereby you renegotiated in different phases. I mean, some of these schemes go on for, a decade, sometimes even more. And the multi-phase, surely you're not tied back to something from much earlier. Surely they're you get a new negotiation for each phase. I thought that was what we were striving for.
Yes. So are you talking in the context of planning or funding?
Both.
So in the context of planning, it could be that, there's outline consent for a multi-phase scheme and the developer goes back for detailed planning consent on a phase-by-phase basis. Or it could be a multi-phase scheme where they go in and secure detailed consent up front, at which point we would have, the discussion about investment would have been had at a much earlier stage. So
But even if it wasn't, I don't quite follow that, because our funding, I mean, the amount of grant you're giving now is different from the amount of grant that was given in the past. You're giving 28,000 if it's intermediate. Am I right?
Yeah.
And 30,000 if it's social rent. 60,000, sorry. And that's different from what we used to give in the past, isn't it?
Yes.
So I don't... So
sorry,
Don't
I'm
you
not
renegotiate?
following the question.
well, I think you renegotiate the funding, don't you?
Yes, so if the project, if there's a delay on the scheme and the project falls out of a previous programme, then if it comes back to us as a new proposal or a revised proposal, we would renegotiate the grant rate. But if we agreed a delivery programme with a partner through a contract 5 years ago, and we agreed a grant rate at that time, and they at this moment in time they're still delivering to that programme, then we wouldn't renegotiate the grant rate.
Okay. And therefore you also are tied then to whatever rents they want to charge. In
So
terms of,
as determined through the planning process.
so you're tied into the old affordable rent.
If it was a legacy programme, then that's what we're tied into, providing they deliver the scheme in accordance with the terms of the contract that we signed at that time, then that's what we're tied into.
So we could be living with the affordable rent for much longer, yes. The old affordable rent, unaffordable affordable rent. Correct?
Perhaps in cases, yes, but,
We're very much short. Some of
Is
them
it
very
possible
needs
to
to
continue?
continue her question. So I'm going to.
I had a question.
No. Some of them
say you were
very.
gonna-
You can all have
I'll
a
bring you
go.
at the end, Tony. Some of them very can continue, and then I'll bring in other members.
Yeah, I did. Originally, I just looked at the chair for a bit of guidance of whether I could carry on, but
Yes.
it's gone.
Apologies.
Gone all over the place now. So carrying on with my questioning about the definitions of the different columns that are in your table of your performance table, I think we've covered other affordable rent now. The other column that's not within what I understand the mayor to be currently issuing new grants for is other intermediate. So can you tell me what comes under that category that isn't other affordable rent?
So that could be, it could be other low-cost home ownership or other intermediate rent forms of housing. So, for instance, if you've got a build-to-rent scheme that has some intermediate rent within it, that might be captured by that.
So that's not other affordable rent, even though it's rented. That goes under
That's
other intermediate.
category, yeah.
So that explains why it shot up, because obviously 17-18 there were 14 homes in this column, and now there's 1,935. So that's quite a lot of new agreements there, and this is predominantly built to rent.
Yes.
Great, okay, that's useful to know. So the other column, the intermediate that we understand you to be handing out as part of a new funding deal is London living rent and shared ownership.
Yep.
And there's a bit of overlap here because some things, the two things could be one or the other.
Yep.
So what is the current split within that column between shared ownership and London living rent homes?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so I'll caveat it with a caveat you probably know, but just for everyone's benefit. So when we, when someone has a funding allocation for a shared ownership / London Living Rent home, they don't have to actually decide the tenure until the point of a first sale or first letting. And the idea with that is to basically give the housing association in most cases a bit more flexibility so that they can start building the home, and then when it gets close to completion, work out whether it's best to market that as a shared ownership home or as a London Living Rent home. So the numbers will change over time. What we're seeing, it varies from year to year, but it's around sort of 5 to 10% of that number will be already designated as London Living Rent. So that's the kind of ones up front they know as London Living Rent. I expect what you'll see happen is that number will increase, because as you get towards completion of a large number of shared ownership homes, the housing associations might well decide, actually that's quite a lot of shared ownership homes in a particular development to release all at one time. It might make more sense to flip some of them to London Living Rent rather than keep them all as shared ownership. So I suspect the flexibility will operate more in that direction. The shared ownership number will slightly go down as they're flipped to living rent and they go up. But there are some kind of housing associations which are really keen to get on with living rent, and so they've told us up front they're going to be living rent.
Yeah, we talked to some of the housing providers, and as far as we could tell, the data they gave us, about 90% of their homes were intended to be shared ownership. Mm-hmm. But you're saying that's going to increase over time, presumably also because of these Brexit-related pressures, if they'd rather rent them out than try and put them on the market.
Yeah. I mean, because obviously if there's a knock-on, if house prices are not stable, that impacts on shared ownership, and they might well decide, well, let's put them over to rent instead rather than selling them at a level lower than they expected.
How are we going to be able to monitor this? Because at the moment they're just all combined into one column, and this is a very sizable chunk. This is 5,929 of this year's homes that are in this uncertain, could be all of the other state.
Well, we have provided data about which ones are already identified as living rent. I was just being clear that I suspect if you compare it to completions in due course, the number identified as living rent now is probably an underestimate of what will end up being delivered, I suspect. I mean, it's not, it could go either way, but just my gut feeling on it is that the number that housing associations are willing to declare as living rent up front at the point of starting is probably going to be lower than what will complete, because of the reasons we've just talked through.
And what split would you like to see? What matches Londoners' needs?
Well, what matches London's needs is a lot more social rent, but that's not what the funding is available for. So, what we're really saying to housing associations is that they can make that decision based on what they think the need is when they complete those homes. I mean, they're targeted at reasonably similar parts of the population, in that they're both intermediate homes, living rent and shared ownership, both intermediate, although the income cap for living rent is obviously lower than shared ownership. So we would like to see a split, but it's a new concept. It's only a couple of years old. We're not going to set a specific split, because that would kind of run against the flexibility which was really key to this approach. Okay,
and if you see it remains at 90% shared ownership, will you try and do more to shift that balance?
Well, we are constantly talking to housing associations about encouraging them to develop more London Living Rent. I mean, obviously, as we've got the new funding programme in a couple of years' time, ahead of that, we'll be reviewing how intermediate housing works, and making sure that it's tailored in the right way for Londoners, and that housing associations are able to deliver it. So, we are constantly talking to housing associations about doing more living rent, because I think they need confidence to go ahead with it. I mean, I suspect, as I say, this is not a target, but I suspect that as housing associations see other housing associations delivering it and see how popular it is, they will have greater confidence to deliver some themselves. So, we'll keep having those conversations.
Okay, and then moving on to social rent. You and the Mayor keep comparing performance on social rented homes with past performance. And obviously we've seen an increase this year in the amount of starts at social rented levels. It's up about 42% on the previous year, which sounds brilliant until you recognise that is 13% of the assessed need. We've seen 3,991 starts, and the need is for 31,000 homes at social rent. So this isn't the step change yet, although it looks impressive compared to last year. in terms of fulfilling Londoners' needs. What are you doing to change that?
We are telling government we need more money for social rent. And that's what we're saying loud and clear. And we say every time we talk to government, in private and in public, we need more money for social rent. You know, the overwhelming need is for social rent. It has been a struggle to get any money for social rent. As I said, when we started out, there was no money for any rent at all from government. So for us to have gotten any has been somewhat of an achievement. And I think the fact that we're delivering, starting now, record numbers of social rent homes is a testament to the focus that we put on that. But you know, I started by saying this today, and I start by saying it, you know, most times I speak in public. What we need from government is more money for social rent, and there's no getting around it, and there's no way we can magic them out of nowhere without having the resources we need.
So you said earlier on in your negotiations with the government, you were going to ask for social rent to be the majority of the funding. Do you mean the vast majority of funding when you say that? Have you got a target percentage of social rent homes grants that you're going to go to government and say this is what we need?
So there's a lot of work that we've been doing with housing associations and councils to do some modelling behind all of that. It wouldn't be right for me to release those numbers now because we've been doing it with housing associations and councils have been involved in it as well. But we'll be publishing that soon and we'll share it with you and run you through it when it comes out.
Okay, because the majority could be 51%, and that definitely would not be fulfilling Londoners' needs, as far as I
If
can
you're
tell.
trying to tempt me to say the number out loud, I'm not going to say it.
It's more than 51% then.
Because I just explained to you that because we've been working with housing associations and councils on it, I'm going to agree with them when we make it public.
That's really helpful. And then finally, outside of your own funding streams, are we pretty confident in saying there's no social housing being built without these subsidies? Or is any?
I suppose there might well be some. I mean, I suspect that we are supporting most of the social rented housing which is being built is probably getting our support. But I don't know, Rebecca, whether you think
Well,
maybe a bit. Yes.
yeah, perhaps. And going back to the early discussion about the discrepancy between our figures and MHCLG's figures, that may well be. But given the subsidy requirements, I suspect that the majority of what's being built out there comes through our programme.
Are we anticipating getting any through Section 106, through planning agreements without subsidy in the future? Through the London Plan provisions, for example?
I mean, there is a requirement there to deliver social rent as part of the mix. So we would expect some to come through Section 106 requirements. But you know, I think a lot of it will be delivered by strategic partners who will use their funding, and they'll be part of our funding agreement.
Okay.
Thank you. Assembly Member Devonish and then Assembly Member Boff.
This is my question on me.
No. This was what you wanted to say earlier.
Yes, I was looking for some worked examples of, because there's lots of lack of clarity in terms of, in this sense of what's affordable rent. Would you be able to provide any worked examples of X scheme in X borough that means that we are meeting what we or your mayor requires rather than what we had in the past?
We can certainly go away, look into that and come back to you.
Thank you.
Almost in the same area, perhaps with the data that you have from the start of affordable rent, perhaps you could produce us some stats as to how many affordable rent properties have been at the 80% at the maximum and what kind of breakdown has been.
I don't know what data is available, but we can take that away.
Thank you very much.
My concern on this point about affordable rent is I can understand if they're hangovers from other previous funding rounds. That's just the way it is. But for new developments, one thing I think that was really good about the mayor's what the mayor did with this new funding round was this clear demarcation between London affordable rent as a low-cost rent option and then intermediate tenures. And it would seem to me that continuing to fund any affordable rent, even if the mayor has made a judgment that it is affordable, slightly muddies the waters. Shouldn't you be saying to housing associations where they've got a development and it's been given planning consent with these different levels of affordable rent, shouldn't you say to them, well, okay, we'll fund the other ones, but you have to fund those other affordable rent products yourself? Shouldn't that be what you're saying?
I mean, we would definitely encourage housing associations to do just London affordable rent, social rent, because that's what we want to see. And we have those conversations with housing associations. They know our view on that. I mean, I suppose if you've got a strategic partnership, you're not necessarily identifying, on a case-by-case basis exactly what money is going to what unit because they have an overall target. and then they have the money from us. But I think the point in general is absolutely right, in that we want both through our planning policy and through our funding approach to see London affordable rent, social rent, to be what people are building.
Okay. Moving on, the next question is on size mix, and that's Assembly Member Gavron.
Yes. Thank you. Recently, in answer to a question, the Mayor said that 70% of the 2017-18 affordable housing figures were 1 and 2 bed. And I'm just wondering, is there any way that we can have that broken down so that we see how many were studios, how many were 1 bed, how many were 2 bed?
I think we should be able to do that you mean break down the percentage? So
Sorry?
Do you mean break down the percentage? So rather than, you mean X percent, Y percent, Z percent for studios
Yes.
1 and 2s?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that should be possible. Yeah.
Do you think you can do that? And can you do it across 10 years?
Yeah. I think we can. Yeah, well, we can take that
Think
away.
you
and
can?
check. I think so. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, do you have the answer now? By the way, do you have the answer
I don't
now?
have the answer now, but we
So
can
you'd have
certainly
to
follow
tell
up.
us. Because there is an enormous amount of difference between a studio, 1 person, bed flat, and a 4 person, 2 bed. And it'd be very helpful to know that.
Yeah.
So when would you get that?
We'll just follow up after this committee and come back to you as soon as we can with this and all the information.
That'd be great. Thank you. And so that's size mix and across 10 years. Be
Yeah.
really helpful. We don't have those figures, do we? Am I right? We don't have anything up to 2019, 2018-19. Do we have that kind of breakdown? Not now, but could it be provided?
As I say, that's what we'll go and check for you and come back to you with.
That would be very good too. Thank you. Okay, and then this is an assumption I'm making, but are there? I would presume that there are more 1 and 2 bed amongst the Section 106s. Am I right about that?
I don't know, to be honest. I know certainly there would be more. I would,
I'm talking about affordable.
Yeah. I certainly think there would be more 1 and 2 beds amongst the intermediate affordable. So if you've got a programme or a development where most of the affordable is intermediate, then you'd expect there to be more 1 and 2 beds, because typically intermediate, like shared ownership homes, tend to be a 1 and 2 bed rather than 3 bed or more, whereas you expect to see more of the 3 bedroom pluses within the social rented, or the social housing element of the affordable housing. I'm not sure whether there would be the same difference between Section 106 and other sources. I mean, in principle, following the approach of the draft London plan, there shouldn't be, because the same planning policy would apply to all planning applications that come through. So if boroughs are required to set a requirement for the size mix of social housing, that would apply to social housing being built, whether it's funded or not.
Yes. But you've just been telling us, I think, if I've understood properly, to Sian Berry, you've just been saying that, in fact, most of the Section 106 are not social rent. But, so, it's this 1 and 2 bed thing. Because what I was going on to say, that given that, if that is the case, and it'd be good to, if there's any way you can show us that, it'd be helpful. So it's another request. But if that is the case, then it makes a lot of sense to make more of the family, to prioritise family housing where you are giving grant.
Well, as I say, I mean, really the level of family housing within the social housing part of affordable housing should be adhered to irrespective of whether or not funding is given. So that doesn't necessarily determine
Yes.
the balance between social housing and intermediate housing, but within the social housing, given that the draft London plan says boroughs should set a size mix requirement for the social housing, then you'd expect that to apply whether or not funding was going into those units.
Right, yes. It's just boroughs that we've heard a lot about, and in fact the English Housing Survey bears that out. There's massive overcrowding in 1 and 2 bed flats, across all tenures at the moment. And so it's just really what I'm driving at is if there's a way we can get more family housing. And I guess the reason for asking for this data is because then it'll show us exactly what's happening. At the moment, we've just got anecdote and what boroughs say when they come to meetings. What we haven't got is the hard evidence yet. So thank you. That's
Assemblymember Boff.
Very, very quickly, I think it may have been your first housing committee meeting, maybe the second. I actually asked you this. If my memory is wrong, forgive me. And I'm sure I asked at that time whether or not we could express any future targets, not just in the number of units that are built, but also the number of bedrooms that come with that, because that then gives us a better understanding of the kind of size mix. Is that something that you think you could do in future to express?
I couldn't hear all that.
To express targets or completions or starts in terms of numbers of bedrooms that are being delivered rather than just units, because then that gives us Assembly Member Gavron has asked for something much more granular, and I support that absolutely. But just saying the number of bedrooms that you've started would give us an idea.
spaces.
Bed spaces, whatever the term.
We like bed spaces.
Bed spaces. Actually, that's right. You're quite right.
Because bedrooms can be...
bedrooms can be...
I think, unless I misunderstood, that's essentially the same request that Assemblymember Gavron made of us, which is to look at whether we can give percentage breakdowns by bedroom size, essentially.
It's kind of the same thing. I was just trying to remind you that I had asked for that. Yeah. I thought I'd asked for that a few years ago.
I have a sort of vague memory that you may have done, Andrew.
It would be great if we could get that. Thank you.
Yes, and I sort of hope we're not funding any studios, but we probably are.
Loads.
But moving on.
We like those pocket flats as well that are smaller than studios.
They're not. They're actually built at the minimum space standards.
They're bigger than studios.
Yeah. Moving on to the final set of questions, which is Assembly Member Devonish.
Thank you very much, Chair. James, what proportion of your 116,000, that magic figure, you're committed to deliver will be delivered by the largest strategic partner housing associations, please?
So off the top of my head, I believe L&Q has a strategic partnership for 12,000. I think it may have gone up slightly, actually, if I'm thinking about it, because 12,000, I think, was the initial deal we struck with them in 2016-17. I believe it's gone up since then. I might look to Ricardo to fill in the gap on that one. It's gone up, hasn't it? Yeah. It's gone up by 1,000, so it's gone up from 12 to about 13,000 within that. So L&Q would be the biggest strategic partner there. There are now, quite a few strategic partners. Some of them are delivering. The average would probably be around 4,000 or 5,000. With some of them slightly below that, and obviously some like L&Q are quite a lot above that. But that would be the kind of scale we're talking about.
So do you want to write to me, because of the 116,000, the question was what proportion of them will be for these partners? So
sorry. Yeah,
so could you come back to me and chot up all the figures of the L&Qs and all the other big players, and as a percentage of the 116,000, that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you it's roughly around 44,000 of them. So, but we can write to you with these.
Excellent, thank you.
Sorry, just to interrupt. That data is basically an update of the table of initial funding allocations that you made in June 2017. So basically it's an update of that we're after. It gave all the different councils and all the different housing associations.
Oh, yes.
We haven't had that updated to match the 116,000 target, just the 90,000.
Okay, that's a very good point. Thank you.
So it's essentially the same table, but with the numbers on.
Okay.
That would be great, thank you. Can you update us on the involvement of smaller housing associations, the so-called G340, in delivering the affordable homes we need, please?
I thought it was G320.
320, is it? Thank you. Added 20 on.
I don't think there is actually 320 or 340 in them. It's just a number now, but yeah.
There'll be one soon.
So what we've been doing is working very closely with some of the smaller and the medium housing associations, and Actually, the medium housing associations we've made quite a lot of progress with. So just to throw in another acronym for you, the L8, so London kind of medium 8, sort of New Lawn, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So we've actually got now, signed a strategic partnership with New Lawn and some of the other sort of more medium-sized housing associations. So that's been really positive, kind of getting the medium ones to do a bit more. In terms of the smaller housing associations, I mean, we are working really closely with them to work out what they all need on an individual basis. There have been some examples where a few of the smaller ones have come together, which has been really helpful, because actually if you've got 2 or 3 of them operating together in a little mini consortium, that actually helps quite a lot, just in terms of them getting a bit of capacity. If they need to hire some extra staff and so on, they can share it between them. And one of the really, really good things we've done with L&Q is actually their programme to deliver 1,000 units with smaller housing associations with a particular focus on BAME housing associations, and that's where L&Q does the building and so on, helps them with all the actual physical building, but then the smaller housing associations own and manage the properties thereafter. So that's one way of really helping them.
And this question isn't on here, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Would you, when you give us the answer to the first question in terms of the larger ones as a percentage, could you give us the figure in terms of the L8 and then the G320 as well?
We should be able to. I mean, it might be slightly trickier, just insofar as, for instance, if this 1,000 has been done by L&Q, we might not have the breakdown of that within that, so we could just say there are 1,000, but it might not be as solid as the other data. Sure, thank you.
And what impact has there been from the higher grants offered for early starts in the most recent funding allocations?
So the higher rate applies specifically to shared ownership units. So in the sort of latest update we did last year, the rate for London affordable rent / social rent went from 60 to 70. Shared ownership went from 28 to 38, but only for a limited period, and then drops back down to 28. And a pattern that we've seen in the data we've been talking about today is the focus on intermediate housing. So it appears to, it's not a direct causal link. It's quite hard to draw that, but it does appear to be working insofar as intermediate housing, shared ownership is being delivered, with the caveats being that actually what we'd like to see as well is a lot more social rent.
Thank you. And moving on to the London boroughs, I always like to talk about London boroughs. How many starts have been registered by the boroughs themselves under the Building Council Homes for Londoners programme, please?
So I think it was 1,990, was it? Sorry, 19. Let me just grab the exact stat for you.
Just under 2,000.
Just under 2,000, yeah.
Thank you. And how are you managing and monitoring the borough's delivery progress under this programme, please?
So it's being done essentially at 2 levels. I mean, one is the officer level, where the area teams within the housing department are frequent liaisons with their counterparts in the boroughs, managing the programmes very closely. In some cases, individuals from the housing team have actually gone and worked a couple of days a week in the council. So they're actually sort of embedded in the council to get their programme up and running. That's worked really well in Newham, for instance, where Newham is really ambitious, brilliant leadership under Mayor Roxana Fiaz there. It's been really great, and there's been someone from the GLA who's been there helping to get their programme really scaling up quickly, get on with it, and so on, and that's worked really well as evidenced by their delivery. There's also obviously the political level, so if there is sort of an overview of it, or if there are any particular issues, that's where I might have a conversation with the leader or the mayor of the council or the relevant cabinet member, but it's quite a close relationship with the councils because they're all scaling up very quickly. So it does mean that we have to work very closely with them to make sure they've got support that they need and that we're being flexible where necessary, but also not too flexible because there are targets which they need to hit, and it's working very well.
And how many of the boroughs are working well with you out of the 33?
Well, some of them didn't put in bids, so I'll discount them, but I think we have Building Council Homes for London's programme with 27 of them, I think, at the moment.
Okay. Thank you. And this is probably the most difficult question in the way. What impact has the recent slowdown in the London housing market had on affordable delivery?
So I think right now, in terms of if you look at the starts which we achieved last year and we're achieving now in the current quarter, they are still coming through, and that is positive. I think if we're honest, housing associations have begun to get nervous in recent months because of the cross-subsidy element that we've been talked about a bit earlier in this session. And so when they're considering what to do later this year or early next year, there is a greater degree of anxiety, I think, amongst some of the housing associations and their board. That's why we set out this £200 million that we were going to offer to housing associations to help them through the uncertainty at the moment. If it does get to a situation later this year where we actually have a no-deal cliff edge, then everything escalates, as I say, very dramatically. And at that point, we'll need government to intervene and step in, because whatever money we might have to support them won't be anywhere near enough.
So you almost partly answered my next question, which is what mitigation is in place and what more do you plan to ensure we continue to deliver a maximum capacity?
So the 200 million that we announced is money which can support housing associations in particular where they are nervous about beginning particular schemes because of their market exposure, because they've got a lot of market units in their private sale units in developments that they're thinking about starting this year. We're offering extra funding if they can make sure they bring them forward to deliver them quicker. Quite often it would be by converting some of the market units into some kind of affordable home, which would be a way of taking out some of the market risk, and obviously from our point of view getting more affordable housing, so it has a benefit there. But I think to be really clear, we've got this bit of wiggle room, this £200 million, but we don't have a lot more. And I think if things do escalate dramatically later this year, then we will need to look at something of a very different order of magnitude.
So just excluding we don't have a disaster, in light of the slowdown, just typical slowdown, how confident are you at this stage of delivering on your target next year?
Yeah, we're very confident, yeah.
Great. That was a straight answer, a straight question. Brilliant. And finally, can you point to any examples where affordable delivery has supported or catalyzed open market delivery?
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
Can you point to any examples where affordable delivery has supported or catalysed open market delivery?
Well, I think in a way, right across the board, because if you think about it, if you've got a development which is 35% affordable housing, the home builder, the developer knows up front there's going to be that affordable housing. There can possibly be some subsidy going into it. Effectively, those units are pre-sold in a way because they've been sold to the housing association, who then manages them, or if their shared ownership sells them onward and so on. In some ways, that helps build the market housing as well. The relationship does feed back, because if you've got a housing association, they need the cross-subsidy from the market housing, so it does get a bit complicated in terms of the feedback in both directions. But I think the overwhelming feeling that we got from the industry when we came out with our affordable housing target is that, yes, overall, I think the industry said that they felt it was a bit high, but in some ways, if they said it was too low, I'd be surprised. I'd expect them more likely to say it was a bit too high. But even notwithstanding that point of view, they said at least having the certainty is good, because at least we don't have to have that extra bit of risk. We know how much affordable housing we deliver. We know that we can work with the housing association to effectively sell it to them. We know they can get granting to support it, and so on. So, I think actually affordable housing does help to keep the market going. And as we see at the moment, if there is going to be a downturn, if people are nervous about building a market sale, affordable housing is the answer. It's not only what Londoners need, but it also helps to keep building going.
I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Member Devenish. Does anyone else have any further questions? Speak now. Going.
Just to make a comment that I think it's always been that in times of recession, and it was certainly true after 2008, that the affordable, people used to then say that affordable housing was the only show in town, because you really do need it to keep the market going and to pump prime the open market.
Absolutely, and I don't know if you want to respond
and
to
that's
that, but
why
presumably that
this government ought to be
would require, yes,
thinking harder about it.
Funding from the
absolutely. So if I can just close by saying this, Chair, in that I think the solutions that we need to fix London's housing crisis, even with the fairest of winds and without any storm clouds on the horizon, would require massively more building of social housing, affordable housing, council home building. We're not going to increase, even with the fairest of winds, the amount of homes we build without focusing on the increase being social housing, council housing, affordable housing. In the context of a downturn, of things turning sour, that becomes even more the case, and it not only becomes essential to boost housing supply, but to maintain it and to keep stuff going.
Thank you very much. And Assembly Member
Just
Berry.
to clarify, I've now looked up the table that I was referring to earlier.
Oh, yes, yes.
It's July 2017, and it was for the first 50,000 homes worth of grants. And we haven't had an update in such detail before since then. So rather than the 90,000 in June 2017 that I mentioned.
Okay, does that make...
Which is quite important because the...
Yes.
Why don't you send the table to...
We'll send, yes, okay,
Social
we'll be doing
It's
a
the only
follow-up,
time we've had
a follow-up letter. And
housing
we'll,
association by housing
and we'll
association
make sure it's
table.
drawn out, one of
Yeah.
our questions is on
Just
that.
for the transcript, it was July.
No, that's
not
very
June.
helpful. Thank you very much. Okay, well, to our guests, thank you for your contributions. We have a few more formal items on the agenda that we need to discuss that you are welcome to stay for, but also you are free to go. You would be mad to stay for it, yes, indeed. So finally, can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion, and thank you, and agree to delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any outputs from the discussion? Great, thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the Housing Committee work programme? Thank you. The next meeting of the committee is scheduled for the 2nd of July 2019 at 10 o'clock in Committee Room 5. There is no urgent business today, so that ends the meeting. Thank you. We actually rattled through that
Back to Committee
relatively.
Room 5 again.